So, I want to continue my conversation with you about my personal experiences. And I want to pick up from where I left off, which was basically in Raymore, Missouri, and what happened following high school. And I was entering a time where there was really nothing going on paranormal wise in my life. I went to basic training, non eventful, in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. I want to back up for a second, and I want to tell you my reasoning for leaving the Raymore area. In hindsight, now that all these years have passed, I can make a direct correlation to the events of the fire affecting me of such that I felt not only was I trying to escape my domineering mother and passive father, I also wanted to get away from the situation. Even though the spills were moving, that house was still going to be there. And it was something I would see, on a weekly basis anyway, if I visited my mom and dad. I needed to not have that in my head. I don't know why it was as traumatizing as it seems like it was, but it scared the living shit out of me. And I wanted nothing to do with any of that. I never asked for any of it. And I just wanted to not deal with anything crazy. So I went to basic training, and then afterwards, I went to the to my AIT. When I joined the army, they were basically said, "You you can do whatever you want." I guess I came real close to maxing the SVAB test, but uh, I was. They were asking about become going to officer candidate school, and I don't really want any part of that. I really wanted to be enlisted, but the main thing I really wanted out of the United States Army was to get the fuck out of Raymore, Missouri. Simple as that. And so when I saw the recruiter, they were able to give me a guarantee of going to Germany for my first duty station, depending on the MOS that I chose. And I chose an MOS that specifically solved a couple different things. It got me out of the country, for one thing. It involved electronics, and because my dad was involved in electronics, that was his career path. I felt like, hey, maybe I'll follow the old man's footsteps and go into something that has to do with electronics and computers. And at the time, even though it was a very early in computing age, my dad told me, son, you really need to try to think about getting into computers. And at the time, um, when I made this decision to join the army, I was very fortunate enough that, having some loving family members, my Aunt Thelma and my Uncle Bob, who I thought very, very, very highly of, um, they got me a job at a little place called Cotter and Company, which was right there on 71 Highway South, just right there at 150. And it was a big True Value. It's still there. I think the warehouse is still there. It's called something different, I think, now, but it was a True Value hardware store warehouse. And I worked in the H section, which stood for heavy. It actually stood for heavy as shit. And it should be the HAS section. And this was really, buckets of chain, boxes of nails, hot water heaters, safes, anything that you can think of that is really, really heavy. I would pick these and put them on a cart, and that's on a conveyor belt, and it'd go around the whole warehouse. And at the end of the day, us guys would go to the loading docks, and we would load these trucks up with all the stuff that had been picked for the day. Some of it was totes. A lot of it with the bigger items that I was dealing with were not. And it dawned on me that even though I was making really good money for an 18-year-old at the time, I knew I could get stuck in this so easily. I had fucked up any possibility of getting a scholarship for college my senior year. And some of it, I don't want to make excuses, but some of it, I hit my head and my mental state wasn't really good. So the Army provided an opportunity to just start anew and have a fresh canvas to work from. And the main thing was it was far from the reach of my mother, and I could not be controlled anymore. I couldn't be abused anymore. I couldn't be anything anymore. I could because I was gone. And surprisingly enough, my parents both wanted a relationship with me, even though we had a huge falling out, and it didn't seem like it was going to be something that could be reconcilable. The minute I joined the Army, they were looking at it like, oh, well, he's okay now. And so I left. And like I said, AIT or basic training was, completely uneventful. It's just head games, and, a few fights. That's about it. Then I get into Arizona. And the reason why I mention this is because of the thought around secrecy. The MOS I joined at the time required a secret clearance. Now, later on, into my enlistment, my MOS was one of those that was recruited for a different job. And the different job was something new that was new to the Army. The Air Force had it for a while, called the Defense Dissemination System. And that required a top secret clearance. And I found it intriguing being in that world. So not only did I get a chance to go to Germany, but I also got to work in military intelligence, which was one of the draws for me to actually sign up and sign the dotted line. So here I am at the Military Intelligence Center and School at the lovely Fort Huachuca, Arizona, doing my AIT. And this is where I met my friend John Word, who would become, a lifelong friend. But John is one of the few people out of all these stories I will tell. He's one of the few corroborators and the few people that is directly experienced a lot of stuff with me in Germany, specifically. And while we were in AIT, it was very much like going to college. I mean, we were there for, I think, a year or so. So it was a lot longer than most of the military occupations schools. And that was cool because it really did take on kind of a college sense. They didn't mess with us like they would, soldiers that had a shorter AIT. They would be very much an extension of basic. This was lax. I mean, they had rules, and we we would get caught doing a lot of crazy things. As a matter of fact, when I think about all the crazy things we did in AIT and how none of us went to jail is just beyond me. Oh, I'm wearing my Army veteran hat, and specifically for this episode. So, yeah, it's amazing that none of us went to jail for some of the things we did. I'm not talking anything crazy. I'm just really just partying, really, is what it really boiled down to. So Arizona is a very spiritually charged area. And I remember being up in the Huachuca Mountains and feeling I hadn't yet lost the tether I felt to nature. And so I spent a lot of time outdoors and hiking in Car Canyon and doing a lot of things outside. And Arizona, obviously, especially down by the Mexican border, is very different than the Raymore area or the area I grew up in eastern Kansas, western Missouri, that general area right there around the Kansas City metro area. It's very different because it's so lush here. It's June 11th, and it is just like everything around here is just growing crazy because of all the rain we've had this spring, and it's summer. and the temperatures are rising, and so it's just plush here. It was, just arid as can be in at Fort Huachuca, so it was a completely different. But I felt this very positive thing spiritually, as far as, I wasn't participating in any organized religion. I wasn't really doing anything except for spending time under the stars with just me and creation a lot of the times. And I valued that, a great deal. Which brings me up to my first duty station, which was in Stuttgart, Germany. So to tell this story, well, at least this first story, because there's a whole lot that's went on with respect to Stuttgart. And I'll apologize in advance, because some of the there's so much time has transpired since, all this happened, that some of the timeline I'm not 100% sure about, but they all occurred. Now, whether this one was before this one or this one was after this one, I don't really recall. I am going to tell you the timeline as best as I can remember it. So I arrive in country, and John is one of the first people to kind of greet me. And, we're reunited, best buds. And so, John's going to impress me with all of his, he had been there for about a couple months before me. And so he had already, started learning the language pretty good. And he already had some spots, picked out for us to, go hang out at. And what I believe occurred was that we didn't have anything kind of crazy happen until Ludwigsburg. Ludwigsburg was about 30 miles north of where we were stationed, which basically was the Stuttgart airport. Stuttgart Army Airfield was basically attached to the Stuttgart airport. And so after I arrived, I had a boss, Ernie, and Ernie didn't like me. I felt like I was always constantly getting picked on. I never really knew why. It just seemed like there was, like, Ernie had some issues. I don't know. But there was a duty, a volunteer duty that came up called Skiff Guard. And at the time, I really didn't know what it was about, but they were asking for people to volunteer to go do this 4-month duty up at Ludwigsburg. And at the time, I just felt like, man, I'm not enjoying this. This guy's kind of an asshole. I'll raise my hand and I'll go to Ludwigsburg and do this Skiff Guard. Well, Skiff stands for, I believe, Secure Compartmented Information Facility. So this is where our secrets are kept. And the brigade headquarters there at in Coffee Barracks, I believe, in Ludwigsburg, Germany, is where I was, basically going to do the Skiff Guard. And the job was really simple. There was this big ass door that separated the underground portion of this building from the above ground. I believe there was either 4 or 6 stories above ground, and I don't really know how many were below. But that was your job, is just to check IDs, make sure that whoever's requesting access, you'd see a lot of couriers coming in. Whoever had access, actually generally had, was on a list to have access to the skiff. And, I would, have to stand every time the colonel would come in, or the sergeant major. I'd salute the colonel when he come in, and it was just a job, and I started on days, eventually went to mids, did nights. It was just a really strange job to have, of just checking badges, but you had to have a clearance in order to work that position. Now, in the skiff itself, they had TS, top secret information, as well as, my clearance at the time was only for secret. But, you could work this job of making sure everybody had access to this building, or to the skiff. So my first night there, I get a ride up from one of the NCOs or who, I can't remember who. Maybe it was Spradlin. I don't really remember who was the who drove me up to Ludwigsburg, but somebody volunteered to do it in a Cuckvy in a truck, an army truck. And my first night there, I get some temporary linen and my room assigned to me. And the next day, I'm supposed to get my full issue of all the stuff I need for the 4 months I'm there, because you don't bring certain stuff with you. You bring your drawers and your uniforms and stuff like that, but there's a bunch of other stuff you would not bring. Like you wouldn't bring an M16, you wouldn't bring any of that kind of stuff, but you would bring your BDUs and your web gear and all this other stuff that you would have, your LBE. You would bring all that stuff. And so after I get there, a guy meets me, and I'm just talking, just somebody who's in the barracks, and he has some oysters on the half shell, or I had some oysters and crackers, I think, with this dude, and a couple beers, and it was whatever local beer is in that area, and it was really good, and so I just chilled and talked with this dude for a little while, and then I had a couple things I brought up with me. I had brought up a little old Korg synthesizer, and so I brought that with me, and I'd make some music on that. So that night, I'm trying to go to sleep, and approximately a little bit after, I don't know, 2 a.m, maybe it was a little close to 3, I hear all this party going on in the floor above me. And, I can hear chairs, scoot across the floor. I hear a lot of people, a lot of voices, hear a lot of banging, a lot of thuds on the ceiling, the roof, for the floor above me. And eventually, sometime around 3:30, 4 o'clock, I eventually drift off back to sleep, but it was so loud, it woke me up. So the next morning, when the CQ shows up, charge of quarters, the guy who happened to be the supply sergeant, said, "Let's go get your issue stuff." And so I said to him, I said, "Hey man, I'm not trying to be a dick, but whoever was like in the room directly above me was out at it late last night, and I had a hard time sleeping." And so he started laughing. And I was like, oh, that was just kind of a weird response. He says, "Come on, let's get your stuff." So we go up to the floor above where I was staying, and you get up there, and there's it's kind of it's basically the attic space of the building, and those German buildings are kind of all the same, or at least these barracks and these type buildings, where they're usually like 3 stories, and they're long. So it's a very long box building, a rectangle building, and then they have just a pitched roof all the way down it, and so that top floor is really this portion of the attic, and so you got the walls that come in on the other side, then kind of goes straight down, and he opens up the door. And when he opens up the door, there's nothing but pallets up here. So it's just pallets of, GP mediums. Their tents are up there. Some supplies and stuff are up there. It's not air conditioned. And there's a cage at the end of the room. It's chain link fence, and it's got all the controlled things like ammo and NBC gear and stuff like that. Your gas mask and stuff like that. All that's behind this chain link fence door. And so I'm looking around, and I said, "So nobody lives up here?" And he shook his head. I said, "So were they just using this room to party last night?" And he shakes his head. I said, "Do you have rats?" And he started laughing. He goes, "No." He says, "Hey man, you're going to hear all kinds of crazy shit while you're here. So everybody's just used to it. So it's not a big deal. People tell you all kinds of crazy stuff." And that was my first night there. My first night there was all this noise. this loud noise, and it was nothing. There was nobody up there. And, I even asked him, I said, could somebody have come up here who had keys? And he goes, no, there was nobody up here last night. And I said, okay, I'll drop it. And so I start my skiff guard duty. I'm working days, and I'm talking to some of the other skiff guards there. And it's weird because the guys who are getting off nights they're standing there at the doorway, and as soon as your hand hits the door, they're out. They're gone. See you, man. Have a good one. And I was like, well, I want to get out of here, but is there anything I just need to know? Oh, you forgot your books. I'll get it. Whatever. They don't care. Just want to get the hell out of the building. And when I was talking to some of the guys, they said, oh yeah, the people down in the skiff that, they see full body apparitions. They'll see goose stepping Nazis and stuff. And at first I was like, yeah. Because I just wasn't buying it. If I'm being 100% honest about it, I just didn't think, I wasn't buying into this very much. So, but I didn't have any other explanations for what had happened to me. And so it goes, then I start working mids. And mids, same thing. It's just a job. People look stressed and stuff like that. But I like mids more than days because I didn't have as much standing up and sitting down because of, brass coming through. And, you had a little bit evening in there. So, that, it was kind of a little bit more chill. And you could read books and whatnot. And then eventually I ended up on nights. And this is where it got weird. So, again, people are telling me these stories about what it's like working this job. And I'm reluctant to over imagine, it's active imaginations or something else. So part of my job was to go up and make sure that the doors are locked from whatever the 4th floor, 6th floor, whatever it is, all the way back down to the ground floor where the front door is at. So I would lock the front door. No one can get in or out. And I would go up, and then I would go up this all the way to the top of the stairs where the colonel's office is. And I would lock that door first, and then check and make sure any interior doors are locked. And then I'd lock all the way back down. And the first time this happened, I was in such disbelief that I thought maybe I was losing my mind. So in the middle of the night, and this wasn't always at the same time, so I can't say always. It was always 3:38, 3 a.m. I wrote a song about that, by the way. But it wasn't that time. It was sometime between midnight and 4, always. Never before midnight, never after 4 a.m. But always within that 4-hour window, shit would go awry. And how this manifested while I was working nights it'd always be the same thing. I randomly start by hearing a door slam. And I would look up and know that it came from probably at the top floor. And it would sound like it's back in there. It's like it's within a room, a door slamming. Well, there's nobody in the building. There's nobody upstairs at all in the building at all. I'm the sole person there, and there's people working in the skiff because there's always people in the skiff downstairs. Front door's locked. Nobody can get in and out. Nothing's going on, but there's doors slamming upstairs. And then, after a couple nights of this, of just random doors slamming, then this pattern starts emerging where I hear, then it sounds a little closer, like it's on the floor below. Then, and at least 10 separate times, I got up from my desk there at the skiff guard desk, walked around it, and walked to the front door, stepped out the front door onto the front porch area, and told myself, if I see anything come down these fucking stairs, I'm out. And leaving that post would have immediately meant going to Leavenworth and turning big rocks into little rocks. And I didn't want any part of that. So I would, tough it out. But I stood there on so many times looking up at those stairs and telling myself, if I see anything coming down these stairs, I'm out. I am out. I never did, but the sound would repeat for the duration I was working on nights. Not every night, but a significant portion, I would say probably over 50% of the time. These doors would randomly slam. Sometimes it was one or two of them, and then more than not, it was this pattern of starting at the very top and kind of slamming doors all the way down until it was you could tell it was on the floor directly above me. And it would be the door facing the locked door that was facing, the outside there. And it was weird because I would go up and some doors would be unlocked after I'd locked them, and some doors would be still locked, and no idea how or what was making that sound, but it would just happen repeatedly. And then the situation happened with John. And John and I have talked about this when we kind of reunited. I think I found him on, I want to say Instagram, and reached out to him, and we got connected again, and we've been, in communication with one another ever since then. And like I said, John has added detail to some of these stories that I had forgotten about. But the most alarming thing is that when I specifically asked about this event, it was blocked. It was completely blocked. He had zero recollection of it whatsoever. And I was just so alarmed by that, because it was like, how do you not remember this? Because it was pivotal. A lot of bad shit went down directly after this what I'm getting ready to tell you occurred. So John he's on his motorcycle. He had a 900 Ninja. And then the way we would do this would be, on the weekends or whenever we did shift work in Stuttgart too. It was a little different, but we did shift work there, and we obviously did shift work for the skiff stuff. And our schedule would sometimes overlap, and I would have 3 days off, and I believe John had 3 days off too. So we would go explore the German countryside and go see different cities and hang out and party, do a lot of partying. And so he would ride up on these situations and stay the night in my room in the barracks. As long as the CQ didn't mess with him, he would stay in my room. And then when I'd get off work that morning, we'd kick it. We'd jump on the bike and boom, be gone. And so John had come up to stay, and whoever was on CQ basically said, you can't stay here. And it was it was a little bit of a hike, and he didn't really want to go all the way back to Stuttgart. So I said, I got an idea. I'm going to put you up. It's the weekend. He's not going to be in here. I'm going to put you up in the colonel's office. We'll get you a blanket. He's got this big leather couch up there. We're going to put you up there. I'm going to lock you in. And here's the deal. If you hear me jingling these keys, you got to get up. You got to take the blanket with you. Don't leave it on the couch. Take the blanket with you. Go hide in the stall. There's a couple stalls in his bathroom. You jump up on one of the toilets and just hang out until he's gone. Or find some place to hide. But you can't, if you hear me jingling these keys, you know that somebody's here. And so he's like, okay, that's fine. So I go back downstairs. And he was going to try to get a little sleep. I wasn't going to get any sleep, I was going to work my shift and then get off, and then we'd go run around all day, and then eventually that night I'd crash. So I get John situated and I lock him in there. I go back downstairs, I go to the desk, I sit down, I start reading a book. And then several hours later, and it was about 2:30 in the morning, I hear this beating on the door. Then he starts, I hear him calling my name, Bill, boom, 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 beating on the door. And so I dropped the book. I'm startled by this because it was all of a sudden, it scared the shit out of me. And so I'm running up the stairs and I'm trying to find the fucking key to the door, and I'm trying to get the key in the door, and he's banging on the door so violently that I can't get my key in the door. I was like, stop banging on the goddamn door. So I finally got the door open, and as he ran past me, we exchanged a glance. We locked eyes just for a second, and he was terrified. He looked as white as a sheet, and as he passed me, he went flying down the stairs. And at the time, we had this, it was the mid 80s. So we had this thing where we would often, as Americans, we would wear jeans and, white t-shirts. It was just kind of a James Dean kind of a thing. So that's how we dressed a lot. So John had on a white t-shirt and he had blood basically all down the front of his shirt. And he goes racing past me out the door. And I'm like, the fuck. That's all I kept saying was, what the fuck? So I'm trying to, and when I open this door, when he ran past me, there is a large volume of cold ass air that comes hitting me. And the door to the colonel's office was like cooler cold. And so I'm closing the door behind him, and I'm trying to get I dropped the keys. I'm fumbling with it. I'm trying to hold the door shut, and I'm trying to get my keys in there so I can lock it again. And finally I get the door locked, and I'm jumping down the stairs. I'm 19 years old at the time. So, or 19 or 20. I don't know if I'm 20 yet or not, but I'm just basically jumping like 5 stairs at a time, a flight at a time, going plunk, 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 all the way down to the bottom. I didn't give a shit. I was going to break an ankle or not. I just wanted to get away from that room. I was freaked out, to say the least. So I get outside with John. Again, there's nobody. It's the middle of the night, so of course there's nobody there. And the MP station is basically directly across from us. There's a shack right there. We're right up by the front gate and stuff. And it was convenient, if you needed the MPs to defend the building. But yeah, they also could see, what are you doing out here? That kind of thing too. So they didn't come over or anything, but John's over there. He's bent over. He's got his hands on his knees, and he's just, it looks like he's in shock. And I'm asking him, I must have said it 100 times, dude, what the fuck? So eventually he finally gets around to telling me that he was laying there on the couch, and he thought that I was fucking with him because he thought he heard footsteps across the floor, on the wood floor. And of course, I was at the desk. And so the next thing he said is it sounded like 1,000 voices simultaneously whispering in his ear. And he said his nose just exploded down the front of his shirt. And I could tell he was freaked out by it. I mean, he was genuinely freaked out. And I don't know if it was that night, or a different night, but I know that shortly thereafter, he left from being up there in Ludwigsburg and pulled over on the side of the road on the Autobahn to catch some Z's or do whatever. And it might have been that night. He didn't stay, and he just went home that night. And I think this is the night that his bike basically got stolen. And it was a terrible set of circumstances. After that occurred, John didn't come back to stay with me up there. And luckily my duty up there was just about over with. Now, in the time that I had remaining there, a couple other things happened. We were inside the barracks room where I was staying, and there was a couple of guys were over there with me, and we're messing around with just playing with my synthesizer and stuff like that, just shooting the breeze, having some beers, playing music, and just whatnot. And out of nowhere, uh, the army at the time had a lot of bunk beds that were made out of solid oak. They were just these wooden bunk beds. At least they were in Germany, and so they'd be stacked, and a lot of times they'd be up by these windows. Well, the windows in our barracks were the kind where you have the handles like this, and you would do like this, and you would pull them open like this, or I think that you could turn them the other way, and then you could tilt them down. Well, these were like this, and you would pull them open. Well, this one would open, and it would come up against the bunk bed. Out of nowhere, that window flew open so hard that it took a chunk of wood. The window didn't bust, but took a chunk of wood out of the bunk bed, like a big chunk. That's how much force it had on there. So we thought, what the hell? German tornado? What the hell? And so I leaned out the window. There's no breeze. There's nothing. And there's, you're 3 stories up, so nobody's outside, fucking with the window. And that was unexplained. My dreams for the duration I was there were just not good. They weren't like anything I can point my finger on and say it wasn't that, I had a werewolf dream or I had a demonic dream or something like that. It wasn't like that. It was more of a feeling of waking up with a sense of dread, like whatever I was dreaming that I no longer remember now was dread. And I'm sure that this was just something psychological that was the byproduct of being up here. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else. There was a photograph that I've been trying to locate that is a kind of it shouldn't be this way. It was a double exposure, and there's no reason for it to be a double exposure because none of the other images around her were that way. And it happened, that picture is moments before that window opened. So it's a weird picture. It doesn't capture any ghost or anything else, but it's just a weird how the picture turned out. It was a little odd, and no other pictures from that time, had anything like that. But that's pretty much it. That's my first duty station in Stuttgart. And I was so fearful. And now that I've learned more about this entire subject, I have to wonder if whatever was present in either, because these are 2 different buildings. The barracks building is different than the brigade building. The not slamming doors and the cold room and what happened with John happened in the brigade building. The party upstairs and the window flying open, that happened in the barracks building. And they're, like half a block away from each other. So very close proximity. But I have the suspicion that whatever was there might have got attached and followed me back to Stuttgart, because in the second part of the Stuttgart story, I'm going to go through all the crazy ass shit that occurred after I got back to Stuttgart. So stay tuned on that one. See you next time.